Hi everyone, I'm Vicky. We are going to discuss about class 11 biology NCERT in this video. Welcome to Vicky's Neat Prep. In class 11, in unit 5, we have human physiology. In this, we have 7 chapters. First one is the digestion and absorption, breathing and exchange of gases, body fluids and circulation, excretory products and their elimination, locomotion and movement, neural control and coordination, and chemical coordination and integration. In this video, we are going to discuss about digestion and absorption. Before going to this topic, we need to discuss about a scientist named Alfonso Corti. He is an Italian anatomist. He began his career by a study on the cardiovascular system in reptiles. Later, he began study on the mammalian auditory system. And in 1851, he published a paper on describing the structure located on the basilar membrane of cochlea. It bears hair cells which converts sound vibration into nerve impulses. The organ is named as organ of Corti after him. Now we enter into the introduction of this chapter. Food is the basic requirement of every organism. The major components of food are carbohydrates, proteins, fats. The minor components of food are vitamins and minerals. Food provides energy and organic minerals for growth and repair of tissues. Water intake helps in metabolism and prevents dehydration. Biomacromolecules cannot be utilized in original form when taken. Digestion is a process of conversion of complex food substances into simple absorbable forms. Digestion takes place by mechanical and biochemical methods. Now we enter into the topic of digestion. Digestive system consists of alimentary canal and associated glands. While we go into alimentary canal, its anterior opening is mouth and posterior opening is anus. Mouth leads to a buccal or oral cavity. Buccal cavity bears teeth and tongue. Teeth. In this, we have three types: thecodont, diphyodont, and heterodont. Thecodont. Tooth embedded in a socket of jawbone. Diphyodont. In this, the organism or a living being have two types of teeth in lifetime. They are milk or deciduous teeth and permanent or adult teeth. Now the third one is heterodont. Normally a human being bears 32 permanent teeth. They are incisors, canines, premolars and molars. The dental formula of a human being is 2123 by 2123. In this we see molars, premolars, canines, incisors, and socket of jawbone where a thecodont teeth is placed. Tooth surface has hard enamel on the surface which helps in the mastication of food. Tongue is a freely movable muscular organ. It is attached to the floor of buccal cavity to the bone called frenulum. On the upper side, it bears small projections called papillae and some of them are taste buds. Oral cavity leads to pharynx. Pharynx is a common passage for both food and air. Esophagus and trachea opens into pharynx. The entry of food into glottis is guarded by a flap-like structure called epiglottis. Esophagus is a thin and long tube. Esophagus is subdivided into neck, thorax, and abdomen. Esophagus leads to stomach. Stomach is a J-shaped bag. It is located in the upper left portion of abdomen. The stomach is divided into four parts. fundic, cardiac, body, pyloric. First portion of stomach is fundic. Cardiac is the portion of stomach where esophagus opens into it. Body is the central part of the stomach. Pyloric region of the stomach opens into the small intestine. Opening of esophagus into stomach is guarded by gastroesophageal sphincter. Small intestine is divided, it bears of three parts: duodenum, jejunum, ileum. Duodenum is a C-shaped part. Jejunum is the mid portion of small intestine. Ileum is highly coiled portion of small intestine and which opens into the large intestine. Opening of stomach into small intestine is guarded by pyloric sphincter. Large intestine has three parts: caesium, colon, and rectum. Caesium is a small blind sac which hosts symbiotic organisms, and it bears finger-like projections called vermiform appendix, and this vermiform appendix is a vestigial organ. And the second part of small intestine is colon. Colon is of four types, is subdivided into four parts: transverse colon, ascending colon, descending colon, and sigmoid colon. And the third part of large intestine is rectum. Rectum is the last part of the alimentary large intestine which opens out through the anus. Here we can see the human alimentary canal. This is the oral cavity which opens after the mouth. It bears glands called submaxillary and sublingual glands under the tongue, and parotid gland above the above the tongue, above the buccal cavity. And buccal cavity leads to pharynx, and pharynx is the common passage for trachea, food, and air, which the air enters into the trachea and food goes through the esophagus. Here, a flap-like structure called glottis helps prevents the entry of food into the windpipe, that is into the trachea. Here, the esophagus opens into the stomach. The cardiac region, fundic region, cardiac region, body, pyloric region. Here there will be a pyloric sphincter which opens into the small intestine. The first part of the small intestine, duodenum. The second part, jejunum. The third part, ileum. Then this ileum enters into the large intestine. The first part of the large intestine is caesium, which bears a vermiform appendix, and then the second part of the large intestine is colon. Colon is of four subparts: ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon, sigmoid colon. And the last part of the large intestine is rectum. Rectum leads to anus, opens into anus, and from anus we excrete. Here the wall of the alimentary canal lined by four layers. We have serosa, the first outermost layer made up of thin mesothelium; muscularis, the second layer made up of smooth muscle, inner circular, outer longitudinal. As we can see over here, the third layer is submucosal, made up of loose connective tissues, contains nerves, blood vessels, and lymph vessels. At duodenum, it bears some glands. The fourth layer is mucosa. The innermost layer bears irregular folds called rugae. These rugae are villi. Villi supplied with a network of capillaries and lymph vessels and blood vessels. These all are known as lacteal. Villi bears microvilli, which has a brush border appearance, which helps in increasing surface area enormously. Here we can see the serosa, the outermost layer, which have circular mesotheliums, and the second layer, muscularis, has inner circular and outer longitudinal inner cells, and the mucosal layer and submucosal layers are seen over here, and this part is known as lumen. When we move to the mucosal epithelium, has goblet cells which secrete mucus and helps in lubrication. It is also present near the glands in stomach and crypts between villi, known as crypts of Lieberkuchen. Villi are finger-like projections. These are known as lacteals, capillaries, artery, crypts, and vein. I forgot to say about the parts of stomach. The esophagus opens into the cardiac. It is the second part of the stomach. The first part is fundus, second part is cardiac, which in which the esophagus opens into it. The mid part is known as body, and the last part of the stomach is known as pyloric, which opens into the superior portion of duodenum. Here a sphincter is present. It is known as pyloric sphincter. Here a gastroesophageal sphincter is present. Now we enter to digestive glands. Digestive glands are of three types: salivary glands, liver, and pancreas. Salivary glands are of three types: parotid, cheek glands, submaxillary or mandibular glands, lower jaw, present in lower jaw, sublingual glands below tongue, secrete saliva. Liver, largest gland which weighs up to 1.2 to 1.5 kg, situated near the abdomen below diaphragm. It bears two lobes. Hepatic lobes are the structural and functional units of liver. Each lobule is covered by a thin connective tissue sheath called Glissen's capsule. Bile secreted passes through hepatic cells and gets stored in thin muscular sac called gall bladder. Duct of gall bladder, cystic duct, along with hepatic duct from liver forms common bile duct. Bile and pancreas duct opens into duodenum, hepatopancreatic duct. It is known as hepatopancreatic duct. Hepatopancreatic duct is guarded by a sphincter of OD, by a sphincter called sphincter of OD. Pancreas is a gland which has both exocrine and endocrine glands situated between the limbs of the duodenum. C-shaped duodenum. Exocrine portion and secretes alkaline pancreatic juice containing enzymes. Endocrine portion secretes hormones. This is the gallbladder where the bile is stored. Duct from gallbladder has a common passage for hepatopancreatic duct. Common bile duct, ducts from liver, common hepatic duct. This is the common hepatic duct. Pancreas is finger-like short organ. This is duodenum and pancreatic duct present in pancreas. Hepatopancreatic duct can be seen over here. Digestion of food takes place. The process of digestion is accomplished by mechanical and chemical process. The buccal cavity performs two major functions: mastication of food and facilitation of swallowing. The teeth and the tongue, with the help of saliva, masticate and mix up the food thoroughly. Mucus in saliva helps in lubricating and adhering the masticated food particles into bolus. The bolus is then conveyed into the pharynx and then into the esophagus by swallowing or deglutition. The bolus further passes down through the esophagus by successive waves of muscular contractions called peristalsis. The gastroesophageal sphincter controls the passage of food into the stomach. The saliva secreted into the oral cavity contains electrolytes like Na+, K+, and Cl- and enzymes like salivary amylase and lysozyme. The chemical process of digestion is initiated in the oral cavity by the hydrolytic action of the carbohydrate splitting enzyme, the salivary amylase. About 30% of starch is hydrolyzed here by this enzyme. Optimum pH of it is 6.8 into a disaccharide. Maltose, lysozyme present in like maltose. Disaccharide like maltose. Lysozyme present in saliva acts as an antibacterial agent that prevents infections. Starch is converted into maltose in presence of salivary amylase which has a pH of 6.8. The mucosa of stomach has gastric glands. Gastric glands have three major types of cells, namely mucous neck cells which secrete mucus, peptic or chief cells which secrete a proenzyme pepsinogen, parietal or oxyntic cells which secrete HCl and intrinsic factor essential for absorption of vitamin B12. Vitamin B12, the main example, cyanocobalamin, the main example is it is present in milk. The stomach stores the food for 4 to 5 hours. The food mixes thoroughly with the acidic gastric juice of the stomach by the churning movements of its muscular wall and is called chyme. The proenzyme pepsinogen, on exposure to hydrolytic acid, gets converted into the active enzymes, pepsin and the proteolytic enzymes of the stomach. Pepsin converts proteins into proteases and peptides. The mucus and the bicarbonates present in the gastric juice play an important role in the lubrication and protection of the mucosal epithelium from excoriation by the highly concentrated hydrochloric acid. HCl provides the acidic pH optimal for pepsins, which is of 1.8. Rennin is a proteolytic enzyme found in the gastric juice of infants, which helps in the digestion of milk proteins. Small amounts of lipases are also secreted by gastric glands. Various types of movements are generated by the muscularis layer of the small intestine. These movements help in thorough mixing up of food with various secretions in the intestine and thereby facilitate digestion. The bile and the pancreatic juice and the intestinal juice are the secretions released in the small intestine. Pancreatic juice and bile are released through the hepatopancreatic duct. The pancreatic juice contains inactive enzymes like trypsinogen, chymotrypsinogen, procarboxypeptidases, amylases, lipases, and nucleases. Trypsinogen is activated by the enzyme enterokinase secreted by the intestinal mucosa into active trypsin, which in turn activates the other enzyme in the pancreatic juice. The bile released into the duodenum contains bile pigments, bilirubin and biliverdin, bile salts, cholesterol, and phospholipids, but no enzymes. Bile helps in emulsification of fats, that is breaking down of the fats into very small cells. Bile also activates lipases. The intestinal mucosal epithelium has goblet cells which secrete mucus. The secretion of the brush border cells of the mucosa along with the secretions of the goblet cells constitute the intestinal juice or succus entericus. This juice contains a variety of enzymes like disaccharides, example maltase, dipeptidases, lipases, and nucleosidases, etc. The mucus along with the bicarbonates form the pancreas and protects the intestinal mucosa from acid as well as provide an alkaline pH medium which is of 7.8 for enzymatic activities. Submucosal glands and like Barner's gland also helps in this. Proteins like proteases and peptones, partially hydrolyzed proteins in the chyme reaching the intestine, are acted upon the proteolytic enzymes of pancreatic juice. Proteins, peptones, and proteases in presence of trypsin or chymotrypsin or carboxypeptidase gives rise to dipeptides. Carbohydrates in the chyme are hydrolyzed by the pancreatic amylase into disaccharides, polysaccharides like starch, in presence of amylase like salivary amylase gives rise to disaccharides. Fats are broken down by lipases with the help of bile into di and monoglycerides. Fats in presence of lipases gives rise to diglycerides and also then to the monoglycerides. Nucleases in the pancreatic juice acts on nucleic acid to form nucleotides and nucleosides. Nucleic acids, nucleases in presence of nucleases gives rise to nucleotides and then to nucleosides. The enzyme of the succus in the succus entericus act on the end products of the above reactions to form the respective simple absorbable forms. These final steps in the digestion occur very close to the mucosal epithelial cells of the intestine. Dipeptides in presence of dipeptidases gives rise to amino acids. Maltose in presence of maltase gives rise to glucose, two molecules of glucose. Lactose in presence of lactase gives rise to glucose and galactose. Sucrose in presence of sucrase gives rise to glucose and fructose. Nucleotides gives rise to nucleotidases. Nucleosides in presence of nucleotidases. And nucleosides gives rise to sugars and bases in presence of nucleosidases. Di and monoglycerides gives in presence of lipases gives rise to fatty acids plus glycerol and glycerol. The breakdown of biomacromolecules mentioned above occurs in the duodenum region of the small intestine. The simple substances thus formed are absorbed in the jejunum and the ileum regions of the small intestine. The undigested and unabsorbed substances are passed on the large intestine onto the large intestine. No significant digestive activity occurs in the large intestine. The function of large intestine are absorption of water, minerals, and certain drugs. Secretion of mucus, which helps in adhering the waste undigested particles together and lubricating it for an easy passage. The undigested unabsorbed substances helps feces enter called feces enters into the cecum of the large intestine through ileocecal valve, which prevents the black backflow of the fecal matter. It is temporarily stored in the rectum till defecation. The activities of the gastrointestinal tract are under neural and hormonal control of for proper coordination of different parts. The smell, the sight, smell, and or the presence of food in the oral cavity can stimulate the secretion of saliva. Gastric and intestinal secretions are also similarly stimulated by neural signals. The muscular activities of different parts of the alimentary canal can also be moderated by neural mechanism. both local and through CNS. Hormonal control of the secretions of digestive juices is carried out by local hormones produced by the gastric and intestinal mucosa. Calorific value of protein, carbohydrate, and fat. The energy requirement of animals and the energy content of food are expressed in terms of measure of heat energy because heat is ultimate form of all energies. This is often measured as calorie or joule, which is the amount of heat energy required to raise the temperature of 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. Since this value is tiny amount of energy, physiologists commonly use kilocalorie or kilojoule. 1 kilocalorie is the amount of energy required to raise the temperature of 1 kilogram of water by 1 degree Celsius. Nutrition is traditionally referred to kilocalorie as the calorie or joule, always capitalized. It as the amount of heat liberated from complete combustion of 1 gram of food in a bob calorimeter, closed metal chamber filled with oxygen. It is gross calorific or gross energy value. The actual amount of energy combustion of 1 gram of food is the physiologic value of food. Gross calorific values of carbohydrates, proteins, and fats are 4.1 kilocalorie per gram, 5.65 kilocalorie per gram, and 9.45 kilocalorie per gram, respectively, whereas their physiologic values are 4.04 kilocalorie per gram, 4 kilocalorie per gram, and 9 kilocalorie per gram, respectively. Absorption of digested food products takes place. Absorption is the process by which the end products of digestion passes through the intestinal mucosa into the blood or lymph. It is carried out by the passive, active, or facilitated transport mechanism. Small, intest- small amounts of it is carried out by passive, active, or facilitated transport mechanism. Small amounts of monosaccharides like glucose, amino acid, and some electrolytes like chloride ions are generally absorbed by simple diffusion. The passage of these substances into blood depends upon the concentration gradient. However, some substances like glucose and amino acids are absorbed with the help of carrier proteins. This mechanism is called the facilitated transport. Transport of water depends upon the osmotic gradient. Active transport occurs against the concentration gradient and hence requires energy. Various nutrients like amino acids, monosaccharides like glucose, electrolytes like Na plus are absorbed into the blood by this mechanism. Fatty acids and glycerol, being insoluble, cannot be absorbed into the blood. They are first incorporated into small droplets called micelles, which move into the intestinal mucosa. They are reformed into very small protein coated fat globules called the chylomicrons, which are transported into the lymph vessels called lacteals in the villi. These lymph vessels ultimately release the absorbed substances into the bloodstream. Absorption of substances takes place in different parts of the alimentary canal, like mouth, stomach, small intestine, and large intestine. Maximum absorption occurs in the small intestine. In mouth, certain drugs coming in contact with the mucosa of mouth and lower side of the tongue are absorbed into the blood capillaries lining them. In stomach, absorption of water, simple sugars, and alcohol, etc., takes place. Small intestine, principal organ for absorption of nutrients, principal organ of absorption of nutrients. The digestion is completed here, and the final products of digestion, such as glucose, fructose, and fatty acids, glycerol, and amino acids, are absorbed through the mucosa into the bloodstream and lymph. Whereas the large intestine, absorption of water, some minerals, and drugs takes place. The absorbed substances finally reach the tissues which utilize for their activities. This process is called assimilation. The digestive waste solidified into coherent feces in the rectum initiate a neural reflex causing an urge to desire for its removal. The ejection of feces to the outside through the anal opening, defecation is the voluntary process is carried out by the mass peristaltic movement. Disorders of digestive system. The inflammation of the intestinal tract is the most common element due to ail- ailment due to bacterial or viral infections. The infections are also caused by the parasites of the intestine like tapeworm, roundworm, threadworm, hookworm, pinworm, etc. Jaundice, a disorder of digestive system in which the liver is affected, skin and eyes turn yellow due to the deposit of bile pigments. Vomitings, a disorder of digestive system. It is the ejection of stomach contents through the mouth. This reflex action is controlled by the vomit center in the medulla. A feeling of nausea precedes vomiting. Diarrhea, disorder of digestive system. The abnormal frequency of bowel movement and increased liquidity of the fecal discharge is known as diarrhea. It reduces the absorption of food. Constipation. In constipation, the feces are retained within the colon as a bowel movement occurs irregularly. Indigestion. In this condition, the food is not properly digested, leading to a feeling of fullness. The causes of the indigestion are inadequate enzyme secretion, anxiety, food poisoning, overeating, and spicy food. PEM. Dietary deficiencies of proteins and total food calories and widespread in many underdeveloped countries of South and Southeast Asia, South America, and West and Central Africa. Protein energy malnutrition PEM may affect large sections of population during drought, famine, and political turmoil. This happened in Bangladesh during the liberation war, and in Ethiopia during the severe drought in mid 80s. PEM affects infants and children produ- to produce marasmus and kwashiorkor. Marasmus is produced by the simultaneous deficiency of proteins and calories. It is found in infant less than 1 year in age. If mother's milk is replaced too early by other foods which are poor in both proteins and caloric value, this often happens in the mother if this often happens if the mother has second pregnancy or childbirth when the older infant is still too young. In marasmus, protein deficiency impairs growth and replacement of tissues, proteins, extreme emaciation of the body, and thinning of limbs results. The skin becomes dry, thin, and wrinkled. Growth rate of the body weight decline considerably. Even growth and development of brain and mental faculty stature impaired. Kwashiorkor is produced by protein deficiency and accompanied by calorie deficiency. It results from the replacement of mother's milk by a high calorie, low protein diet in a child more than 1 year in age. Like marasmus, kwashiorkor shows wasting of muscles, thinning of limbs, failure of growth, and brain development. But unlike marasmus, some fat is still left under skin. Moreover, extensive oedema and swelling of body parts are seen. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe to Wiki's Neat Prep.